Hey everyone, how's it going? Halo Infinite has been marketed as the next Halo game for the next 10 years, and that means it's more likely than not we'll get some form of campaign DLC for Infinite over the next decade. So in this video, I'll be sharing my top 5 campaign DLC ideas that I would love to see in Halo Infinite. Now I know it may seem really early to be talking about possible campaign DLC for Infinite given how much 343 and Microsoft still have to do for the game. I mean, the campaign still doesn't have co-op or a theater mode, and the multiplayer's progression and cosmetics are an entire video on their own. But with how game development works, I'm almost certain 343 is working on some kind of campaign DLC while fixing what's wrong with the game. Plus, it's nice to be excited for the future instead of complaining about the present every once in a while. Also, and I think it goes without saying, spoilers for the Halo Infinite campaign ahead. If you haven't played through the campaign, pause the video now, finish the campaign before you get spoiled. But with that out of the way, let's talk about the 5 ideas I have for Halo Infinite campaign DLC. The first campaign DLC idea we're going to talk about is the only one with evidence that it actually exists. A trademark was filed for Halo the Endless, which people speculate will be a campaign DLC for Halo Infinite. The Endless, for those who need a refresher or are watching this without having finished the campaign, are the new species introduced in Halo Infinite, which we didn't get a whole lot of information about. To properly tell the story of the Endless, we have to go back to the Forerunner Flood War, Ancient Humanity, and the first firing of the Halos. So without going into a long-winded hidden Xperia type tangent, after the Forerunners fired the Halo array to wipe out all sentient life in the galaxy and thereby destroy the Flood's food supply, they found something they weren't expecting. Something had survived. Officially named Xylonin, the Endless are a new species that we know very little about. The Forerunners found them after firing the Halos, which should have destroyed all of the Endless along with all other sentient life in the galaxy. After they made this discovery, they imprisoned the Endless on Zeta Halo for 2 primary reasons. The first reason would be to continue ensuring the Flood had no food to continue spreading. The thing is, we don't know whether the Endless can be infected by the Flood. The Flood infect their host by targeting their central nervous system, which is what the Halos destroy with radiation when fired. So if the Endless were able to survive the firing of the Halos, it implies they don't have a central nervous system for the Flood to target, but as of right now it's unclear whether that's the case or if something else is protecting them from the Halos. That brings us to the second reason the Forerunners imprisoned the Endless: to maintain power. In the audio logs throughout the campaign, Despondent Pyre, the monitor of Zeta Halo, hypothesizes that the primary reason for the Forerunners' imprisoning of the Endless was to maintain their power and influence in the galaxy. As such, the Forerunners imprisoned the Endless on Zeta Halo in the hopes nobody would ever know they existed so they can maintain their narrative and position in the universe. Then of course, millions of years later, the events of Halo Infinite happened, the Harbinger was freed by the Banish, and the post-credits and legendary ending seem to imply Atriox, who is somehow still alive, freed the rest of the Endless on Zeta Halo. There's so much fertile ground here for more storytelling. The theories surrounding the Endless are running rampant, which is why it would be a huge missed opportunity for there to not be more done in either a DLC for Infinite or even a full spin-off game like ODST. And reminder that this one has the most potential to exist out of any of the ideas we're going to talk about here. A trademark for the name has already been filed, which granted is something companies will do even if they don't plan on releasing it, just so nobody else can have it, but I would be shocked if we didn't get some kind of Endless focused DLC or spin-off game. I mean, Cortana explicitly says that they are more dangerous than the Flood, which should tell you everything you need to know.
Containment? The Flood? Why would I? You and I both know that there are worse things than the Flood within this ring.
But speaking of the Flood, the second DLC idea is the return of the Flood. Aside from their brief appearance in Halo Wars 2, we haven't seen the Flood since Halo 3, which will be 15 years old this year. We know from the Cortana quote earlier that the Flood are present on Zeta Halo in some form, and we can see a Silex that appears to contain an infection form in the campaign. The Flood returning is something the Halo community has been asking for a long time, and Halo Infinite gives the developers a perfect reason to bring them back. I can already imagine the open world side objectives to defeat a Gravemind or prevent a proto-Gravemind from forming. They can add in things like the flamethrower as a heavy weapon again, and maybe some other fire-based weapons. And the return of large-scale multi-faction battles between Banished and Flood AI fighting each other on the surface of the ring would give this game the scale it desperately deserves. The Flood returning works for the story too. If we go back to the Endless for a moment, there's a lot of speculation that the motive of the Harbinger and the Endless is to take the mantle of responsibility for themselves, and the easiest way for them to do that is to use the Flood. All they would have to do is release the Flood to kill off all the humans, fire the Halo rings without having to worry about their own species going extinct since they're immune, and they would have exterminated all sentient life in the galaxy that would be able to challenge them, as well as the Flood. Hell, the Flood could even return in Halo the Endless as a surprise twist for all we know. The Flood returning doesn't even have to be an intentional move from the Endless. It could be members of the Banished accidentally opened a Flood Silex, similar to how the Covenant accidentally unleashed the Flood on Alpha Halo in Combat Evolved. Perhaps the Endless leader tricks Atriox or another Banished leader into releasing the Flood after the relationship between the Banished and the Harbinger broke down at the end of the campaign. The UNSC could even accidentally unleash the Flood while trying to take control of Zeta Halo. There are tons of possible causes for a Flood outbreak on Zeta Halo, and I can only hope that 343 will use one of them to bring the Flood back. I mean, I don't think 343 would bring the Flood back in Halo Wars 2 and mention them being on the ring by name if they weren't planning on bringing them back in some way. Going into Halo Infinite, we all assumed Atriox would play a big role in the game's story. I mean, he's the leader of the Banished, which is a faction we're fighting on Zeta Halo, so he's gotta have a big role in the game, right? Well, our expectations were quickly subverted when, after an incredible fight scene between Atriox and Master Chief, we are told in a rather innocuous way that Atriox has died. Before we've even finished the first mission of the campaign, the character we all assumed would be the primary antagonist, aside from perhaps Cortana, was already dead. However, at the end of the campaign, our expectations were subverted again when we learned that Atriox is actually still alive and appears to be completing the Harbinger's plan and freeing the Endless from their Silexes at this unknown location. We all wanted to fight Atriox in this game, and after seeing him not just in Halo Wars 2, but seeing him in that fight scene with the Master Chief, it's safe to assume he would make for an incredible boss fight. And that's all this entire campaign DLC should be. There are tons of games, primarily RPGs, that will send you on a campaign that ends with defeating a main boss, or where the true final boss is hidden in the post-game. These hidden bosses are far tougher than any enemy you will fight in the game, and usually take a fair while to find and defeat. Imagine if Atriox was Halo Infinite's version of the Nameless King in Dark Souls, or Red from Pokemon Gold and Silver. Have Atriox be this incredibly difficult boss fight that requires you to use all of your abilities, but is incredibly rewarding when you defeat him. And that's just covering the actual boss fight itself. If this is going to be a full DLC, then it's just as important to get the lead up to the boss fight right. I imagine the DLC being set up as a search for Atriox, where you start at the end of the main campaign, and in an attempt to maintain control of the ring, Atriox unleashes the Endless from their Silexes, and you get all of these new Endless enemy types to fight against in the open world. You can explore the game's open world in the post-game, retaking forward operating bases from the Endless, freeing POWs the Endless of taking, assuming they're into that sort of thing. Maybe Atriox has barricaded himself where this end cutscene takes place, and we have to find high-value Endless and Banished targets, interrogate them for information on Atriox's whereabouts. Maybe they even have smaller boss fights of their own, like what we had with Bassus and Chaklock, to spice things up even more. I really like this idea in particular, not just because I want to see Atriox and Master Chief fight, but because I really think this type of story and gameplay loop would make great use of Halo Infinite's open world. Aside from the small side missions where you freed captured Marines and eliminate banished high-value targets, I don't think Halo Infinite made incredible use of its open world. Sure, there's a beautiful, vibrant landscape for you to explore if you want, but it's not particularly dense. This type of story and gameplay structure could work extremely well in an open world. It would give players multiple options to complete the game, not just as far as gameplay goes, but as far as mission order goes. For example, we could have to find 3 banished generals, who are the only ones who know Atriox's precise location, and they're in 3 separate areas, and we as the player get to choose which one we want to go to first. Maybe even the dialogue plays out differently with each one of the 3 generals, depending on which order you choose. There's so many great directions 343 could take with this idea, and with how connected people are in the Halo community to this villain, and with the history Atriox and the Master Chief had at the beginning of Infinite, I can't imagine not seeing Atriox in some kind of Infinite DLC. I can see 343 working him into other DLCs like Halo the Endless if they don't want to make him his own DLC. I really like my idea for a standalone Atriox DLC, but really as long as they get a true final boss fight between the Master Chief and Atriox at some point down the line, I can't complain too much. So now we start to move away from the obvious ideas. This entire DLC idea comes from one small detail in the game you might have not noticed on your first playthrough, if you even noticed it at all, but it raises big questions about one of the main characters from Halo 5's campaign. During the end of the 8th mission, Pelican Down, Atriox sends 2 members of the elite hand of Atriox, Brute brothers Hyperius and Tavares, to hunt down Master Chief. Aside from the challenge of facing 2 bosses at the same time, one of whom is in a Brute chopper, there's not much to say about this boss fight aside from one thing: Hyperius's armor. On Hyperius's right shoulder, you can clearly see the helmet and chest plate of Spartan Locke. Now, putting aside all of our thoughts on Halo 5 and its campaign, this little detail raises a ton of questions. What happened to Locke? Is he alive or did Hyperius kill him? What did the fight look like? When did it take place? What happened before the fight? What did Locke do on Zeta Halo? Did he even make it to the surface of the ring? There's so many questions that need to be answered. Now, I fully understand that there are people who really dislike Halo 5's story and probably don't want to see anything from that game to return. And to be clear, Halo 5 is my least favorite Halo game. I don't think it's as bad as some people make it out to be, but it's not good, especially by Halo's high standards. But there are some people who do like Halo 5, or at the very least like Locke's character. And as a franchise, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to introduce a new character in one game, build him up as a big deal within the UNSC, both inside and outside the games, and then kill him off screen without any kind of explanation.
Granted, it wouldn't be the first time they've done this.
Whatever they do with Locke, I think we need to see it, and giving him his own DLC would be a great way to do it. For me, ideally, this DLC wouldn't just focus on Locke, but the rest of the characters that introduced in Halo 4 and 5. The game opens with the UNSC Infinity, the pride and joy of the UNSC, being completely destroyed in just 4 minutes, and we barely see it. We hear a lot about it during the audio logs, but I would love to see what happened to the characters like Locke, Lasky, and Palmer in actual gameplay. The last DLC idea is by far the most obscure. I think it's more likely than not this will be part of another DLC if we get one, but it's one I know that the lore fans in the community would be so excited to see, and it relates to the game's legendary ending. In the campaign's legendary ending, a conversation is added to the cutscene's audio that changes a lot of what we thought we knew about the Endless. Now, the implications of the legendary ending are an entire video on their own, and there's plenty of lore nerds that can explain what's happening here far better than I ever could. However, the part I want to talk about today is the confirmation of offensive bias was deployed on Zeta Halo to deal with the Endless. To give you a very brief summary, Offensive Bias was a Forerunner AI designed to replace and defeat Mendicant Bias, who was another Forerunner AI that betrayed the Forerunners to serve the Flood during the Forerunner Flood War after the Primordial gave Mendicant the logic play. If any of that didn't make sense to you, it's okay. You don't need to know everything about it right now. All you need to know is that Mendicant Bias and Offensive Bias are 2 ancient AIs, way smarter than anything humanity or any other species alive in the Halo universe today has ever developed. They have appeared in the background of some Halo games via terminals that start developing the deep lore in the Halo universe, but most of their time is spent outside the games in books and comics. So why should one or both of them appear in Halo Infinite? There's a couple ideas I have. The first is that if Offensive Bias was put on Zeta Halo to prevent the Endless from escaping, and if Atriox releases them in that final cutscene, then Offensive Bias is gonna have to get back to work recapturing them. And who better to help him defeat the Endless than the man who defeated the Harbinger himself? An alternative premise is the return of the Flood. Offensive Bias would most likely be put in charge of containing and destroying a Flood outbreak on Zeta Halo. Who better to pick given his effort in the Forerunner Flood War? Offensive Bias, knowing Chief and the rest of the UNSC are Reclaimers, would probably be interested in helping him, especially given the lack of Forerunner presence on the ring. Of course, the conversation at the end of the legendary ending could and probably is just an explanation for how the Endless were imprisoned on Zeta Halo. It was probably easy to say that Offensive Bias was the one who trapped the Endless in their silexes and let the minds of all the lore fans run wild. And while I mostly believe that's all the legendary ending is, I do think it's bold to put this in the legendary ending itself when it could have easily been just an intel log or terminal like all the other information on these characters has been in the rest of the franchise. If you're going to introduce something like that to a more general audience, you really have to at least intend on that information being at least somewhat useful down the line for that same audience. And just like the Atriox DLC, as long as I see Offensive Bias in the game, I can't complain too much here. But those are just my ideas for potential campaign DLC for Halo Infinite. Of course, let me know what you think down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, like this video if you made it this far, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.